Welcome to Making Worlds, conversations about imagining otherwise. I'm Hannah McGregor, and on this show, I'm going to talk to cool people about fantasy, sci fi, speculative fiction, magical realism, and other genres that let us envision different possibilities for how the world could be. You may know me from Witch Please, a scholarly podcast about the wizarding world of Harry Potter that ran from 2015 to 2022, or my current show, Material Girls, a podcast that uses critical theory to understand the zeitgeist. I'm an author and a professor and a feminist and a weird feral little guy, and I love talking about media that matters to people. Making worlds is an idea that emerged both from my interests and my expertise, and I'm so excited to share it with you. For this pilot episode, I've invited writer and lover of queer media, Hope Rehak, to join me. Hope, pronouns she, her, divides her time between Los Angeles and Chicago. She attended Oberlin College, obtained an MFA in playwriting and screenwriting from Northwestern University, and is a proud graduate of Chicago Public Schools. And she's also Coach's sister. Hope joined me to talk about, drumroll please, Our Flag Means Death. I have no idea. Maybe there will be an animation here that says Our Flag Means Death, but maybe not. From showrunner David Jenkins, the first season of Our Flag Means Death came out in 2022 and quickly found a fan base on many queer corners of the internet. Set in the year 1717, it follows wealthy landowner Stede Bonnet, played by Rhys Darby, on his misadventures as the gentleman pirate and his blooming relationship with infamous pirate Blackbeard, played by Taika Waititi. In the following conversation, we're going to be talking about queer aesthetics, Taika Waititi's hair, and a bunch of other fun things. Hi, Hope. Welcome to Making Worlds.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you so much for having me.
So, the first question always is, what's a text that helped you imagine another world? So, what text are we talking about today, Hope?
We're talking about Our Flag Means Death, the HBO/Max sitcom created by David Jenkins.
Is it a sitcom?
It is technically a sitcom. It is a 30-minute situation comedy.
You've already blown my mind and we're one sentence in.
Great. I mean, it's arguably a rom-com sitcom, but it is a situation comedy.
It is arguably a rom-com sitcom. Okay, tell me a little bit more. Say we've got somebody watching right now who's like, I've never heard of Our Flag Means Death. Like, what is it?
And I would say to that person, you are not alone. A lot of people have not heard of Our Flag Means Death. For
Shocking
some
to me.
reason, I know, shocking for those of us whose lives it has changed, but it has a really small audience share. It's okay. What is it? It is a pirate workplace comedy
Mm-hmm.
that HBO developed when it was HBO Max. It is now Max. It has existed during, I think, two big mergers at HBO, so it's changed and its category has changed, and it follows the story of a real 18th century pirate who, for a little while, traveled with the very accomplished pirate Blackbeard. And it tells the story of their relationship while that was going on. I did a terrible job of that. Can I just get it?
No, I think it was a great job. It's like, cool, 30-minute workplace comedy set on a pirate ship about the unlikely encounter of an inexperienced gentleman pirate and Blackbeard.
You did a great job. That's it.
I just re-summarized things that other people said, and then they think that I said them.
Haha.
So I'm going to start off by saying, it's a sitcom about pirates. Great. Why does it fit into, because I think it really does, why does it fit into the purview of this particular show when we're talking about like speculative worlds, like imagined worlds?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It does that thing that I think I've heard you talk about on various other podcasts, but it kind of sets history as a sort of fantasy background
Mm.
where it is technically set. I think the pilot starts and it says it is 1717, but as soon as we see what that looks like, it's very like Muppets Treasure Island version of 1717. It's not going to be like Black Sails, which is another pirate show, like real gritty 1717. Like people are dirty and people get scurvy, but it's also, it doesn't play by most rules of reality. So it has a sort of lightness and whimsy that makes the world of sort of 1710s Barbados seem fantastical.
100%. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about it is what it then does with history as a fantastical setting. So let's let's I mean, I feel like the the most obvious and for me most powerful thing is the profoundness with which it queers our understanding of history, that it takes um ongoing conversations within queer community about the fact that like queer people have always existed, trans people have always existed, and then says, yeah, okay, so let's tell stories about the past that are fundamentally queer stories.
100%. 100%. I mean, the main romance is a queer romance between two men, and then there's a sort of main character who's a trans non-binary person who has relationships with both like femme and mask presenting people, and then there's like marriage between a gay couple at the end of season two, and there's almost, I mean, the joke in the fandom is that there's like almost no straight people, and the few that are in like sort of straight couplings, there's a couple that are like Spanish Jackie and the Swede.
I was just thinking of Spanish Jackie because she's got like 20 husbands.
She does, so it's like not really like a sort of conventional heterosexual arrangement. She just kind of takes husbands and murders them at will. And it's she's kind of in charge and they all service her.
They do all service her and they're all pretty happy about it.
They're thrilled and they also are like maybe her employees sometimes. They help run her bar. So it's really an unusual setup, let's say.
Yeah, and also like a pretty great reversal of the traditional understanding of marriage as basically buying yourself a woman. Um,
100%.
Instead, she just acquires herself a bunch of men to work her bar for her. Um, okay, so uh, alongside this conversation about queering history, and in fact about like eliding, you know who's briefly straight is Steed's wife.
She is briefly straight, but they promptly get rid of her in season two. She is just a
Absolutely.
season one storyline.
Absolutely. They're like, "Oh, we let you have one heterosexual. We're done with that." Um, okay, so when we talk about queering the past, um, I think a conversation that emerges a lot is the question of the accuracy of queer representation. It's something that I see often as sort of to place queerness in the past, it must be anachronistic or tragic. Those are your two options. So, what do we do in a show like Our Flag Means Death with the question of really of historical queer representation or the question of representation in general?
Well, okay, this is a little bit of a tangent, but if you've read Moby Dick, um,
Hope?
sea life,
Hope?
yeah,
I have not.
and that's fair. I have not finished Moby Dick.
Okay.
I listened to about 18 hours of it during the pandemic, during the really dark days where I was like, I'm just going to listen to every audiobook I never wanted to. But it is remarkably queer. And it's set in the 1850s or something, so it's not exactly the same time period. But I do think that the showrunner and creator, David Jenkins, has done a pretty good job in interviews and, yeah, just in general of sort of making sure that all of the queerness is actually historically like very much what's the right word, accurate. There were gay marriage basically between shipmates on pirate ships, and it has a special name and I've only ever read it but I don't know how to say it, but it looks like matolatage or matolage, and it's like it's basically like shipmates would get married and it happened not just on pirate ships but in like seafaring life, and it was basically like, as far as historians can determine, a sort of palimony agreement where like if one of them died the other would get their assets, But it's like it's sort of arguable and argued about, it seems, about from historians' point of view, whether it was like romance based or sex based, or if it was just a sort of formal life sharing agreement, which is a little bit like, who cares? It's gay marriage. It's a prototypical gay marriage. Yeah.
Like Boston Marriage. Are you familiar with
Yes.
Boston Marriage? Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. And that's like pretty grounded in the history. And I know that the writers have talked about that a lot, especially for the season 2 wedding between Lucius and Black Pete. They were like, this is something that absolutely would have happened at sea with your crewmates as witnesses.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, the likelihood that people weren't fucking on pirate ships seems very low to me, but what do I know?
Impossible.
Okay, so in that sense, it is dealing in historical accuracy.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that question of its speculative nature. Like, what do we do as viewers as we navigate the relationship between what's historically real and what is fantastical or imagined?
Well, I mean, there's so many things going on, right? Like I think the sort of the gift of it being a semi-prestige, well-produced show with a lot of big names behind it, like Taika Waititi being director and producer and star, is that everyone's really beautiful. Everyone's beautiful on that show. And so it's not like, oh, look at this, documentary style story about what really happened to pirates. And then also I think it has a lot of modern values that it's reframing. In particular, actually, let's go back to the first season, but the idea that the wife that Stede Bonnet really, like in history, left behind, we don't know anything about her, but the show gives her this really beautiful story where she loves that he left her because he was gay and they were not in a happy marriage. Gives her a new lover, as you mentioned, a man who wants to have sex with her, which they show us, and a sort of second career as trading on her name as a widow as a painter. So like she's given this sort of like, what if this really happened, but she had everything at her disposal that we would want for her given that time. And it does that a couple of times. Somebody like Leslie Jones's Spanish Jackie. She also, like we were talking about, all the husbands. And it's kind of like the fact that a Black woman in Barbados is in charge of the Republic of Pirates, is in charge of effectively like an anarchist community, instead of being an enslaved person or something that might have been what we would expect. It kind of finds these sort of, what's the right word? You would know, but the sort of holes in history where that sort of thing might have happened. It was possible that it happened, but spends more time on that than it does on like maybe the saddest or more dominant stories.
Yeah, yeah. And that I think connects to something really interesting that you have commented on about this show, which is its queer aesthetics. So this sense that when we are telling stories, putting together, piecing together the holes in history, creatively imagining our way into the possibilities of historical characters, we're always making political decisions as well as aesthetic decisions. And one of the really powerful things about Our Flag Means Death is how deeply queer its aesthetic decisions are. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm obsessed with this, Hannah, because like there, I've been really obsessed lately with the idea of representation versus aesthetics, because I don't know that Our Flag Means Death is like as much queer representation as it is queer aesthetics, because it feels like it's tapping into sort of our contemporary understanding of queerness in terms of how people present, how people dress, how people style themselves, and sort of ultimately what like liberation looks like physically. And I'm not sure that at the beginning, I don't know for sure. I don't know anyone involved with the show, but I'm not sure that like the ostensibly heterosexual cis man married to a cis woman who created the show knew what he was doing. But what he ended up doing was sort of like offering this sort of, I don't want to say new vocabulary, but like hybrid vocabulary between young queer people's aesthetic right now and how these characters that are ostensibly in 1717 sort of style themselves to attract and find community with each other.
Yeah. I was reading about I was reading an interview with the costumer. What do you call that person?
Yeah, costumer. Yeah, that's her
Costumer.
name.
Great. Talking about, like, what a role the actors played in putting together their wardrobes, particularly in the 2nd season, and really empowering them to, like, here are the materials you can work with. Now figure out for yourself what how you imagine your character would engage with these materials. Including, the aforementioned non-binary character Jim is wearing a binder,
Yeah.
and it's made out of, like, like weird shit you'd find on a pirate ship.
Yeah, 100%. And the character of Fang, who's one of Blackbeard's like original crew members and then stays with him, is basically dressed as like a leather daddy at a club. Like just straight up, it is a bare leather daddy look. And I don't know enough about what went into that outfit to know like why or how, but they're definitely borrowing that aesthetic for that character.
Yeah, undeniably. I mean, even your point when you said, like, everybody on the show's really attractive, and I'm like, yeah, everybody on the show is queerly attractive,
Yes.
which is also part of that aesthetic vocabulary. Like, it is undeniably an incredibly hot show. And the the way that, like, the diversity of casting, the gender play, um the celebration of many different bodies and body presentations and gender presentations, that is in no way like a, yeah, you go girl, but it's just like a straight up unironic celebration of, like, a huge bearded drag queen. Like, that's just like, we don't need a discourse about people overcoming internalized fat phobia in this environment. We just have the pleasure and celebration of a deeply queer aesthetic.
Well, and I think that hits exactly on what you were talking about with the sort of setting it in this speculative history where it's just matter of fact. Because of course they're not going to engage with like body positivity because it's 1717. So like
Yeah.
who cares? It's just it is what it is. It's so matter of fact. These are characters in to some degree like unrestrained by things that maybe can in our modern world, do restrain us or oppress us, but they have their own like I don't know, contemporaneous oppressions, but they've all chosen by being pirates, they've opted out of whatever those were. And so, yeah, you're right. It's just a very matter of factness. It's like, yeah, I love Wee John. And actually, in the unaired pilot, in the script of the pilot, he had a twin brother that was Big John, who is
It was
littler.
little. Good, really good.
Yeah, yeah, really fun.
How does one see this unaired pirate pilot? I want it.
Oh, I will send it to you. It's just out there.
Great.
It's just out there. It was just a script, though, not a fully produced thing.
Oh my god, incredible. My second question is about how this show helps you show up in the world differently, how it's helped you, or maybe helped fans of the show in general, imagine the world otherwise. So talk to me about the impact of this show.
It's like such a big question because I came really prepared to talk about the macro. So I am ready to talk about that. But on the micro level, I actually had an essay published about how much it affected me, which was on Catapult. And that essay was, I'm not sending people there. That site has folded, although I think there's an archival post up about it. For me personally, it was like the first season especially like really moved me because it was sort of surprising to watch in real time. People who like me started watching it because it was funny and a sitcom, maybe didn't expect the sort of gut punch of romance in the last 3 episodes. It wasn't advertised that way. HBO didn't
No.
do like an LGBTQ week, our flag
Yeah.
means death. It really was under the radar in that way. And so the romance between Steed and Blackbeard in the first season really moved me, And I was sort of like, I had a relationship that I don't think I would have had with someone that I was like, you know what, if they're the gold standard, this is what I deserve. And so like that affected me on that level. But I think that's my own stuff is slightly less interesting to me than in how it's interacted with the fans that that I see and am a part of on the internet, because I think it came in March 2022 was the first season, and I think the whole first season aired in March 2022, and the whole second season aired in October 2023. And I think in that time, that's the end of the the end of the second year of the pandemic into the beginning of the fourth year, basically. And for people who, I know we're all like kind of back in a way, everyone's kind of back in their lives, maybe the way they were, but I don't think there's a lot of media yet that's responded to that collective trauma and the way that a lot of people really were disillusioned with their conventional lives during that time. And I think, like, people who knew that it was all a lie could probably come to the show from that point of view. But then there are people who are like slowly realizing it. And what I mean is, the
What's
idea
the
that your
it?
job.
Oh, yeah, okay. What's the
Yeah.
it that's all a lie?
I mean, I actually am going to go further, but I would say, like, for some people, it was their job, the recognition that, like, their job wanted them to work at the cost of their own health and their life, which was always true, but became really, like, undeniable in the last few years. And then for some people, a lot of marriages fell apart during the pandemic because of sort of a million things, right? But like unrealistic expectations of women to keep the home sort of running in the midst of all that, which then began to include children, like homeschooling kids that were never intended to be homeschooled, and, watching what their husbands actually did and maybe realizing that they don't work harder than them. They just leave their work at work and then expect to rest when it's domestic labor time.
Yeah.
That was like something that was written about pretty widely, and also I think observed in our own lives. So I think that was something that happened to a lot of people. And there's all these articles from the last few years about how many more people came out as queer during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And had some gender revelations.
100%. Yes, queerness broadly, as in same-sex attraction and in gender, revelations. And I think, like, part of that was the amount of time you were spending with your own thoughts and people not being able to deny those things anymore. But I think part of it also was spending really intense, intimate time with media in place of real people. And so, I do think that there were people, I know, for me, I know, like, anecdotally, at least three. I had two friends who had considered themselves like gold star lesbians who were like, I'm very confused by my attraction to Taika Waititi as Blackbeard.
Yeah.
And then I had a married guy friend who had considered himself straight and was like, I'm very confused by my sexual attraction to Taika Waititi as Blackbeard.
Oh, Taika
And they
Waititi sexually confusing us all.
Across the board.
Yeah.
It was so funny and so cool. But, you're spending this time with these characters, and I think that is part of it.
That's so interesting, that heightened intimacy. And it makes me think about the kind of like metaphorical function of piracy in the series, that like, yeah, it's about piracy, but right from episode 1, it becomes really clear that piracy is about a kind of escape from the status quo, that it's about an escape from expectations, an escape from normativity, and that Stede Bonnet brings with, his particular interest in escaping the status quo, also a vested interest in escaping toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what that means in terms of creating like an emotionally intimate landscape on his ship as well.
That's exactly what I think, and why I think it hit, and why I'm not sure that the people behind it in the first season understood why it had this sort of incredibly outsized fandom impact. Because I remember I actually saw Rhys Darby at a stand-up show in July of 2022. So, like, let's say a scant 3.5 months since Our Flag Means Death had aired. And he was very surprised by the turnout. And the turnout was 90% Our Flag Means Death people in full cosplay.
Oh.
And he was like, this is not my normal stand-up audience. And it was really interesting to see him at that time, and then kind of just through the internet track, some of the writers' reactions. Like, I don't know that they knew how hard it would hit. And I think that they knew that it was a good show and that it was funny and that everyone involved, had a good head on their shoulders and was talented, but I'm not sure that they knew the cultural place it would assume as a consequence of what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did, I think, really hone in the second season on what people loved in the first one.
Yes, and for me, that is the sort of Steed Merman episode 3, I think. That was like the sort of distillation of we want this, but we also know you want this, and so we're gonna do it.
For folks who haven't seen it, can you give a like spoiler light description of what the Steed Merman scene is?
I sure can. And spoiler light is I'm going to lean into spoiler light. I'm really not going to explain this, but in a dream sequence, Rhys Darby's character of Stede Bonnet appears to Taika Waititi's Blackbeard in a dream as a mermaid. And that moment on the internet was very, like, I guess divisive, because some people were like cringing at how sort of overly feminized that character maybe seemed, or how much like a little girl fantasy it seemed. And I was so delighted, because I was like, no, this is them like leaning in, like you said, to the things that made the first season really special and charming and unique.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a drag episode in season 2.
There's a full drag
Like
episode.
there's just a full drag episode. And those moments, part of the reason why, at least for me as a viewer, they don't feel like they're coming out of left field, is that they are in keeping with the show's larger commitment to a kind of like everyday queerness that is just ramped up in season 2.
100%. 100%. And it's really interesting for me, at least. I've been really obsessed with this because I follow so many of the people who create the show, like on social media. And so many of them seem to be like cisgendered in heterosexual marriages. I mean, all of the principals. Really the only, like, there's a couple of queer actors, but like a lot of the writers, there's a couple of trans and non-binary writers, but it's stunning to me that like this kind of coalition of people all over the spectrum of gender and sexuality could make something that does feel so queer. And I think it's hopeful, but it's really different kind of than what we've seen before, I think, from both straight creators and queer creators. The thing I can't help comparing it to is, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but there's a show called Fellow Travelers right now with that is like by gay men for gay men, and it is so different on every level: tone, what they choose to show, how they choose to show it. It's very much like in that bucket of sort of traditional, a traditional idea of what homosexuality means versus queerness as an umbrella.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about, I mean, on the one hand, what we might mean by queer aesthetics as opposed to gay aesthetics, as opposed to lesbian aesthetics, as opposed to trans aesthetics, which can't all be collapsed into each other. And also what it means to start to have a diverse enough media landscape that we actually get multiple kinds of queer aesthetics.
Yes, that's exactly it. And I think it's like, it's an optimistic show in a way, because it's these characters who are able to live this way. But it's also, I don't think it totally shies away from the things that can make living a queer life difficult. Like, it doesn't, the main character is married to a woman in the first season, and he does have to navigate that. And it's not like ignoring it completely. It's just saying that, like, yes, and.
Yeah, that what makes the relationships in the show hard are what makes life hard. And it's not a fully romanticized image of the 18th century. Like, really terrible shit happens to a lot of these characters. So we definitely see the way that people navigate, like, often very, very grim life circumstances. It's just that the impact of their various traumas on their relationships is not a straightforward, I experienced homophobia and thus do not know how to love a man. It's like, I love this man, but I have experienced multiple forms of trauma and thus am struggling to access emotional intimacy.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And also, it has the benefit of having been said in the past. There's sort of an implication, I'm not sure it's ever stated outright, that several of the characters who sort of experience love for a same-sex or non-binary partner in the show have maybe never seen it modeled,
Mm,
which you wouldn't really have in like something set in 2023. You'd be like, oh, I come with all this baggage of what this means. And these
yeah.
characters really don't in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the space of the ship. What's the name of Steed's ship?
The Revenge,
The
which is historically the name of his ship.
yeah, a really good name for such a whimsical ship. But the space of the Revenge becomes a space of like relative freedom from needing to have things modeled. And that again, I just rewatched the first episode, and the fact that the first episode has the crew making flags really for me is a reminder of the way that the entire series is about a sort of like creative reworking and reimagining of the world that's done sort of collectively in the space of this ship.
Yes, and in that scene, it's right away. It's immediate. I didn't just rewatch it, but I watched it many times. But somebody, I don't remember who it is, but somebody says sewing is women's work. And then Stede Bonnet says, that's not true. I bet a bunch of you know how to sew. And then immediately the burliest, biggest, hairiest man is like, yeah, I do. I
Uh-huh.
used to sew with my mom. Like that's what it's doing in a microcosm, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. All right, Hope. The last thing that we're going to do is a Mad Lib.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, you know how Mad Libs work, Mad Libs work, right?
Yes. Yes. Yay. What's my assignment? Does it have to be our Flag Means Death and pirate theme?
I'm not going to tell you what the theme is. You choose. Okay. The first thing I need from you is an alcoholic beverage.
Tequila.
Great. Second, I need a body of water.
The Caribbean Sea.
Amazing. Now I need, no, this is a tall order. I need 5 adjectives from you.
I can do it. Okay.
Okay.
Glistening, burly, glittery, wet, and strong.
Good, good, beautiful. Just one noun.
Pirate.
Great. And now I need 4 names, 4 proper names.
Proper names. Any name?
Any name.
Okay. Hannah,
Good.
Gabby, Zoe, and Hope. Yeah.
Really good, really nice. And then finally, something you love.
Aw, talking.
Okay. Get ready for this. It's going to be a really beautiful one. Yo ho ho and a bottle of tequila. It's a pirate's life for you. For 3 years, you've been sailing the Caribbean Sea.
Yes.
With the rest of the crew of the Glistening Pirate. Great, perfect ship name. The crew being Burly Hope, Wet Hannah, Strong Gabby, and of course, Little Zoe. But the crew of the Glistening Pirate isn't your average band of pirates, no. Instead of raiding ships for booty, you're only interested in talking.
Perfect.
I think we actually maybe just recreated the whole premise of our Flag Means Death.
It's our Flag Means Death meets this podcast. It's perfect. It's exactly that. It's like, what if our Flag Means Death but us?
Thanks so much, Hope, for taking the time to talk to me about this great show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a highlight of my life.
Thank you for joining me for this first episode of Making Worlds. Making Worlds is a Witch Please production and is funded entirely through Patreon support. I want to take a moment to say a huge and sincere thank you to the many people who support us at patreon.com/ohwitchplease. You are the reason we can sustain Material Girls, the podcast, and the reason we can take a leap of faith by producing Making Worlds, the video podcast. I'll be back every month with a new conversation about a different text. But in the meantime, if you want more Witch Please Productions content, our website has all kinds of fun stuff you'll love, including transcripts, reading lists, and merch. We also have a Substack that features a monthly newsletter called The Monthly Hoot, where you can get access to a wonderful assortment of recommendations, podcast updates, and monthly playlists for your listening pleasure. We also release behind the episode newsletters that delve into the research process for our public scholarship. Head to ohwitchplease.substack.com to subscribe for free. And of course, special thanks to everyone on our team who makes Making Worlds possible. Our producer, Zoe Mix, our associate producer and editor, Gabby Iori, our executive producer, Hannah Rehak, aka Coach, and of course, the wonderful Marcel Cosman, co-founder of Witch Please Productions, who makes dreams come true by saying, "Yes, Hannah, of course we can add another show to our slate. We're definitely not too busy." We'll be back next episode to talk about a whole new piece of media that asks us to imagine otherwise. Until then, subscribe to our YouTube channel for bonus content or tell your friends about us. If I had a sign off, here's where I would say it.